If you had the power to walk into the same room as the people who once broke you, would you choose to prove them wrong, or would you choose to prove yourself right? The Blackwood Charity Gala was the crown jewel of the city's social calendar, a night when the wealthy, the powerful, and the dangerously ambitious gathered under the same glittering chandeliers. The ballroom pulsed with a symphony of crystal clinks, laughter that never reached the eyes, and the low hum of deals being made in whispered tones. To the untrained observer, it was an evening of beauty, luxury, and elegance. But for one man, it was about to turn into a battlefield. Lucien Rao, CEO of Rao Global, strode into the gala as if he owned it. Tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in a midnight black tuxedo tailored to perfection, he was the kind of man people noticed even before they knew his name. His dark hair, peppered with the faintest hint of silver at the temples, gave him the air of a man in full control, not just of his business empire, but of every room he entered. And tonight, dangling on his arm like the latest accessory, was Seraphine Vale, the woman who had replaced his wife. Seraphine was everything Lucien liked to show off: young, glamorous, and hungry for more. The floor-length emerald gown she wore shimmered with every calculated step, designed to make cameras turn and women whisper. She held her head high, her smile sharp, her hand resting possessively on Lucien's arm as if staking her claim. She knew the whole city had heard the gossip, how Lucien had left his wife after years of marriage for her. She relished it. The photographers swarmed the entrance, bulbs flashing like lightning. "Lucien, over here!" "Seraphine, give us a smile." "Lucien, when's the wedding?" Lucien grinned for the cameras, answering with the kind of charm that had made him a corporate legend. "One day at a time," he replied smoothly, as if the question amused him. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that the very room he believed he controlled was about to turn against him. Across town, in a penthouse overlooking the skyline, a woman stood before a full-length mirror. She was slipping into a gown the color of a midnight sky, its hand-stitched crystals catching the light like scattered stars. Her makeup was subtle but flawless, her hair swept into a sleek updo that revealed the graceful line of her neck. Isolde Rao, Lucien's ex-wife, had not planned on coming tonight. In fact, for the past year, she had avoided every event where her ex-husband might appear. The divorce had been brutal, not just emotionally, but in the way Lucien had controlled the narrative. In the papers, on social media, in their shared circles, he had painted her as the quiet, fragile wife who couldn't keep up with his world. A sad but amicable split, he'd called it. He never mentioned the truth, the betrayals, the humiliation, the years she had sacrificed to help him build his empire. When the gala invitation had arrived, she had almost thrown it away. But her therapist's words echoed in her mind. "You can't stay in the cage, Isolde. Even if the door is open and the cage is gilded." So tonight she would step out. Not to reclaim Lucien, God no, but to reclaim herself. She took one last look in the mirror. Gone was the woman who had once dressed to match her husband's tastes, who had softened her opinions to keep the peace, who had faded into the background so he could shine. In her place stood someone new, someone dangerous in her calm. The chauffeur was waiting when she descended to the lobby. As the limousine glided through the city streets, she watched the lights blur by. She felt the weight of the past year, the silence of her empty apartment, the hard work of rebuilding herself, the sting of seeing Lucien parade Seraphine in the gossip columns. But tonight was not about the past. Tonight was about making sure he saw exactly what he had thrown away. Back at the gala, Lucien was working the room like a king surveying his court. Investors, socialites, and politicians leaned in as he spoke, hanging on his every word. Seraphine laughed at all the right moments, touched his arm just enough to send the message. "Key's mine." But then, like a shift in the air before a storm, the murmurs began. Heads turned toward the grand entrance. Cameras clicked, this time with a different kind of urgency. And there she was. Isolde Rao stepped into the ballroom as though she'd been born to command it. The midnight gown flowed around her like liquid night, each movement catching the light. Her eyes, cool and clear, scanned the room without flinching. The chatter faltered. People moved aside as if instinctively making a path for her. Lucien's hand froze on his champagne flute. His smile faltered. Seraphine's grip on his arm tightened. Every instinct told Isolde to look away, to pretend she hadn't noticed him. But instead, she let her gaze find his. She didn't smile. She didn't frown. She simply looked at him, as though he were nothing more than a stranger at a party. And in that single, deliberate act, she took back all the power he had stolen from her. The man who thought he'd erased her was about to learn she was unforgettable. To understand the weight of the moment Isolde Rahl walked into that ballroom, you have to know who she was before the divorce. Born Isolde Bennett in a quiet coastal town in Maine, she had grown up far from the flash and noise of big city life. Her father was a literature professor, her mother a piano teacher. Money was always tight, but the Bennett household was rich in books, music, and long walks along the cliffs. Isolde grew up believing that kindness was a currency more valuable than gold, and that hard work could build a life worth living. After graduating top of her class in high school, she earned a scholarship to Columbia University in New York City. It was there, at a networking mixer for business students, that she met Lucien Rahl. He wasn't in her program. He was a rising star in the business school, but he noticed her from across the room. Tall, commanding, and already carrying himself like a man destined for power, he approached her with a confidence that was both intimidating and intoxicating. Lucien was unlike anyone she'd ever met. He spoke of plans to build a global empire as if they were already carved in stone. He took her to restaurants she'd never heard of, introduced her to people who owned penthouses overlooking Central Park, and seemed to open doors to a life she had only read about in magazines. She didn't realize it at the time, but the Lucien she fell in love with was already wearing a mask. They married 2 years after graduation. At first, it was everything she had dreamed of. A whirlwind of travel, glamorous events, and late-night brainstorming sessions over wine where they talked about building something together. Isolde gave up a job offer at a publishing house to help Lucien in his fledgling company. She wasn't just his wife, she was his sounding board, his editor for proposals, his silent partner in negotiations. She organized investor dinners, soothed ruffled egos, and even helped draft the business plan that secured his first major round of funding. But as Lucien's star rose, her role shifted. She became the face beside him in photographs, the graceful hostess in designer gowns, the woman who smoothed over his rough edges in public. The late-night talks turned into late nights at the office, without her. He stopped asking her opinion on deals, and when she tried to give it anyway, he'd smile the way you smile at a child trying to explain something complicated. She told herself it was just the pressure of building an empire. She told herself he still loved her. But then came Seraphine. The first time Isolde saw her was at a charity gala Lucien had claimed was strictly business. Seraphine was on the event's PR team, a rising star barely in her 20s, with a laugh that seemed designed to be heard across a crowded room. Isolde brushed off her intuition, telling herself she was imagining the way Seraphine's hand lingered a second too long on Lucien's arm. Months later, the truth came out. Not through confession, but through photographs. A gossip site posted images of Lucien and Seraphine in Italy, his hand on her lower back, her head tilted toward him in an intimacy that needed no caption. The humiliation was public and swift. Friends stopped calling. Mutual acquaintances whispered behind her back. And Lucien, ever the master of optics, released a statement painting their split as mutual and respectful. He told the world that Isolde had different priorities, and that they had grown apart. What he didn't say was that she had sacrificed everything for him. That she had been there in the trenches when his company was nothing but an idea and a mountain of debt. That she had walked away from her own dreams to help him realize his. After the divorce was finalized, she moved into a minimalist penthouse overlooking the city. Not because she liked the cold perfection of it, but because it was far from the world she had once inhabited. At first, the silence was suffocating. She didn't know who she was without the constant pull of Lucien's orbit. But slowly, painfully, she began to rebuild. She reconnected with old friends from college, the ones she had let drift away when she became Mrs. Rahl. She began consulting for startups, using the skills she had honed in Lucien's shadow to help other entrepreneurs avoid the traps she'd once fallen into. And she started therapy. A decision that felt indulgent at first, but soon became a lifeline. Dr. Marlowe, her therapist, was the one who pushed her to reclaim parts of herself she had abandoned. "You're not just the woman he left," she said one afternoon. "You are the woman who can walk into any room and make people stop talking. You've just forgotten how." So when the invitation to the Blackwood Charity Gala arrived, Isolde hesitated. It was the kind of event she had once attended automatically, a fixture on her calendar. But now it represented a battlefield. She knew Lucien would be there. She knew Seraphine would be there. And she knew the city's social elite would be watching. For a week, she debated. Part of her wanted to throw the invitation away and avoid the pain of seeing him again. But another part, the part she was learning to listen to, wanted to walk into that ballroom and prove to herself more than anyone that she was no longer the woman he had left behind. The day of the gala, she visited a designer she'd once worked with during her marriage. Together, they chose a gown unlike anything she had worn before. Dark, bold, and unapologetically stunning. She paired it with simple diamond earrings, the only piece of jewelry she had kept from her marriage. As she stood in front of the mirror that evening, she barely recognized herself. Not because she looked different, but because she felt different. Stronger. Sharper. The limousine ride to the venue was quiet. She didn't need a date. She didn't need an entourage. She needed only herself. When she stepped out onto the red carpet, she felt the familiar assault of flashing cameras. Only this time, she didn't flinch. She held her head high, letting the light catch the crystals on her gown. She didn't smile for the photographers, didn't pose for effect. She simply walked, calm, composed, and unshakable. Inside, the air buzzed with the usual cocktail of perfume, ambition, and unspoken rivalries. And then, just as she knew it would happen, the crowd began to shift. Lucien was there, his hand on Seraphine's waist, laughing as though the world belonged to him. He didn't see her at first. But when he did, the smile faltered. His hand slipped slightly from Seraphine's side. Isolde's gaze met his across the room. And in that moment, without a single word, she let him know, "You didn't break me. You freed me." And that was the moment the balance of power shifted. The Blackwood Charity Gala was a study in opulence. It was held at the Blackwood Grand, a hotel that looked more like a palace than a place of business. The ballroom stretched across an entire floor, its ceiling painted with gold leaf constellations that seemed to glow in the warm light of 1,000 crystal chandeliers. Waiters in crisp white jackets moved in perfect choreography, trays of champagne flutes balanced on one hand, silver platters of hors d'oeuvres on the other. The air was rich with the scent of roses and lilies, imported from Holland just for the night. A string quartet played near the marble staircase, their music weaving a delicate thread through the conversations and clinking glasses. Guests wore gowns worth more than most people's cars, and diamonds that could blind under the right light. The city's elite had turned out in full force, CEOs, politicians, old money heirs, and new money moguls, all mingling as if they belonged to the same world. For Lucien Raoul, this was familiar territory. This was his stage. His tuxedo was custom-made in Milan, his cufflinks pure platinum. He shook hands with old allies, made promises to potential investors, and flashed that carefully crafted smile that suggested generosity without weakness. Every movement, every word, was calculated for maximum effect. Seraphine Vale was equally in her element. She had chosen her gown strategically, a deep emerald that brought out the fiery undertones of her auburn hair. She laughed too loudly at Lucien's jokes, touched his arm just enough to keep the connection visible, and scanned the room for the people whose approval she craved. This was more than a night out, it was a performance. But beneath the glitter, there was tension. The kind you could feel in the way conversations faltered when certain names were mentioned, in the way some smiles didn't quite reach the eyes. Gossip had its own current here, flowing quietly between champagne sips. And tonight, a fresh wave was already building. It started as a ripple. A pair of women near the grand staircase paused mid-conversation, their eyes widening. One leaned in to whisper to the other, who gasped and turned her head toward the entrance. A man by the silent auction table followed their gaze, his expression shifting from polite boredom to something sharper. The photographers stationed near the red carpet entrance had sensed it too. Their lenses swung away from Lucien and Seraphine just as the ballroom doors opened again. Isolde Ral stepped inside. She didn't need to announce herself. The gown she wore seemed to catch the light and hold it captive. The crystals along the bodice shimmered like constellations, the midnight fabric flowing around her in waves. Her diamond earrings caught the glow of the chandeliers with every step she took. She moved with the kind of grace that came from knowing exactly who she was and exactly how much she had overcome to stand there. Conversations stopped. People turned. Even the quartet's music seemed to fade into the background as eyes followed her. Isolde didn't rush. She let the moment breathe, allowed the stares to linger without giving them the satisfaction of reaction. Her posture was perfect, her chin lifted just enough to project confidence without arrogance. She walked past faces she recognized, some friendly, some not, and offered a polite, measured smile to each. Lucien saw her. The glass in his hand felt heavier, his grip tightening without conscious thought. His carefully maintained composure threatened to crack, though only for a second. Seraphine noticed immediately, her smile stiffening as she followed his gaze. She recognized Isolde from the photos, of course. Everyone did. But the woman standing there now was not the quiet, understated figure from the gossip columns. This was someone transformed, stronger, sharper, impossible to overlook. And Seraphine hated her instantly. Isolde's eyes met Lucien's across the room. It wasn't a glare, wasn't even a challenge. It was worse. It was indifference. The kind that says, "You're not important enough to disturb me." She looked away first, but not out of submission. She simply moved on, turning her attention to a passing waiter and accepting a glass of champagne. The whispers started in earnest now. "Is that her? She looks incredible. I thought she moved away. Didn't he leave her for the PR girl? She's here alone?" In one corner, an older couple exchanged knowing looks. In another, a young investor who had once dismissed Isolde during a meeting watched her now with a hint of regret. The ripple of attention she caused had its own momentum, and Lucien could feel control of the evening slipping from his grasp. Still, he tried to recover. "Shall we?" he murmured to Seraphine, steering her toward a group of board members. But his charm felt mechanical now, his attention divided. Every time he laughed, it was just a shade too loud, a fraction too forced. Isolde, meanwhile, navigated the room with the skill of someone who had once been the hostess, not just a guest. She greeted the charity's founder warmly, accepted compliments on her gown with a gracious nod, and engaged in small talk that revealed just enough without ever slipping into vulnerability. She was playing her own game, and she was winning. Near the bar, she ran into Marjorie Blackwood, the widow who had once co-chaired the gala with her. "Darling," Marjorie said, eyes sweeping over her, "you look magnificent. I hope you're here to make certain people remember their manners." Isolde smiled faintly. Something like that. They clinked glasses. Somewhere behind her, she could hear Lucien's voice, lower now, tighter, as he introduced Seraphine to a group who seemed far more interested in watching Isolde. She didn't need to turn around to know he was watching her. She could feel it, the way you can feel the sun on your back even through clouds. And then came the first direct approach. James Litton, a venture capitalist who had always been more interested in his own reflection than anyone else's, made his way to her side. "Isolde," he said warmly, "I hardly recognized you. New look?" She sipped her champagne unbothered. "Not new, just not hidden anymore." James raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Well, whatever it is, it's working. People can't stop staring." She let the corner of her mouth curve upward. "Good. Let them look." Across the room, Seraphine's nails dug into Lucien's arm. "Why is everyone talking to her?" she hissed under her breath. Lucien didn't answer. He couldn't, because for the first time in a long time, he realized something unsettling. He wasn't the center of attention anymore. And deep down, he knew. The real show had just begun. Lucien Ral had always considered himself a strategist, not just in business, but in every area of his life. To him, people were like assets, each with their own value, their own utility. He had learned early in his career that charm was just as important as capital. When he met someone new, he didn't just shake their hand. He calculated their worth, assessed how they could fit into his plans. That was how he'd first approached Isolde all those years ago. She had been more than a partner. She'd been an investment. Intelligent, poised, socially adept, she could smooth his rough edges in public elevate his image, and handle the social intricacies he didn't have time for. For years, she played her role perfectly. But as his empire grew, so did his ego. And eventually he decided that the asset he'd once valued had reached the end of its usefulness. Enter Seraphine Vale. She was nothing like Isolde, at least on the surface. Where Isolde had been understated elegance, Seraphine was all flash and fire. She came from a modest background, clawing her way into the upper echelons of the city's PR scene. Ambition was her lifeblood, and she wore it proudly. When Lucien met her during the launch campaign for one of his company's acquisitions, she didn't defer to him like others did. She challenged him, flirted with him, and made it clear she knew exactly what she wanted: power. For Lucien, she was exciting, dangerous in a way that made him feel young again. But more importantly, she was a mirror of his own hunger. She wanted to be seen, to be envied. And in Lucien's mind, she was the perfect partner for his next phase. A phase where flash and spectacle mattered more than quiet stability. Behind closed doors, though, their relationship was far from the perfect image they presented. Seraphine had no interest in being the silent, supportive figure Isolde had been. She wanted influence, and she wanted it fast. If Lucien was the king, she demanded to be the queen. Not next year, not someday, but now. In the weeks leading up to the Blackwood Gala, they'd had more than one argument about their public image. Seraphine wanted an official announcement, an engagement, preferably, that would cement her position. Lucien, ever the tactician, preferred to let the gossip swirl without committing. "Mystery sells," he told her. "We keep them guessing. We keep the spotlight." Seraphine didn't like waiting. And she liked it even less when Lucien's attention wavered. She had noticed it in small ways: the way he sometimes went silent when her name appeared in the gossip columns without him, the way his eyes seemed distant when she spoke about her plans for the future. She knew she was still in a proving phase, and she hated it. Tonight was supposed to be a victory lap for both of them. The gala was one of the most photographed events of the year, and arriving together in full view of the press would send exactly the message she wanted. We are the power couple now. For the first hour, everything had gone according to plan. They'd posed for the cameras, worked the room, and drawn their share of admiring glances. Seraphine was basking in it, until Isolde walked in. The moment Lucien's attention shifted, Seraphine felt it like a cold draft under a closed door. His hand loosened on her waist. His expression hardened, not in anger, but in something worse: focus. She had never seen him look at another woman like that, not even at her in those early intoxicating weeks. She followed his gaze and saw her, the ex-wife. And instantly, Seraphine understood why the air had changed in the room. Isolde wasn't just beautiful tonight, she was dangerous. The kind of dangerous that didn't have to shout to be heard. The kind that could walk into a room and rearrange the social order without saying a word. Seraphine's stomach tightened. She had built her place beside Lucien on the assumption that Isolde was gone, forgotten, diminished, irrelevant. But the woman gliding through the gala now looked anything but forgotten. Lucien, meanwhile, was having a different kind of reaction. He told himself he was just surprised to see her. He told himself it was irritation. How dare she show up here in his world looking like that? But beneath the irritation, there was something he didn't want to name. It wasn't longing, exactly. It was awareness. A reminder of the nights they had once owned rooms like this together. The unspoken rhythm between them as they moved through a crowd, complimenting each other effortlessly. He hadn't realized until now how much he'd taken that for granted. Seraphine sensed it all, and it lit a spark of fury in her chest. She would not be overshadowed, not by the woman who had been discarded, not by anyone. She leaned in closer to Lucien, her voice low but sharp. "Are you going to keep staring, or are we going to remind these people why we're here?" Lucien straightened, forcing his attention back to the present. "We're here for the charity, Seraphine. Let's make the rounds." But as they moved through the room, he couldn't stop himself from glancing toward Isolde, and every time he did, he caught someone else already watching her. It was infuriating. Seraphine, determined to reclaim the spotlight, turned up performance. She laughed louder, touched Lucien more often, and made a point of introducing herself to every high-profile guest they passed. But the more she tried, the more obvious it became. The conversation had shifted. People weren't asking about Lucien's latest acquisition or Seraphine's upcoming projects. They were asking, "Is that your ex-wife? When did she get back into town? She looks incredible." The cracks in their united front began to show. Lucien's responses grew curt. Seraphine's smile became tighter. They were still arm in arm, but anyone watching closely could see the tension building. Finally, near the silent auction table, Seraphine couldn't hold back. "You didn't tell me she'd be here," she said through clenched teeth. "I didn't know," Lucien replied, though the truth was he hadn't even considered the possibility. He had assumed Isolde would keep to the shadows, as she always had since the divorce. "Well, she's not in the shadows tonight," Seraphine said, her tone dripping with acid. "And if you're not careful, you're going to look like you've lost control." Lucien didn't respond right away, because deep down, a part of him wondered if she was right. And that thought, that tiny, unwelcome thought, was the first crack in the armor he had worn so confidently into the gala. What neither of them knew was that Isolde wasn't just here to be seen. She was here with a plan. The silent tension that had been building since Isolde walked into the ballroom was about to break. For nearly an hour, Lucien and Seraphine tried to reassert their dominance over the room. They smiled for cameras, exchanged air kisses with the city's power players, and kept themselves surrounded by chatter. But no matter where they stood, the magnetic pull of Isolde's presence was impossible to ignore. She was like a slow-moving comet, drawing eyes and quiet murmurs wherever she passed. Lucien's patience frayed when he noticed the chairman of the Blackwood Foundation, one of his most valuable allies, laughing with Isolde near the champagne fountain. The man wasn't just talking to her. He was leaning in, clearly captivated. Worse, Isolde looked entirely at ease, her hand lightly resting on the chairman's forearm as she spoke. That easy grace, that effortless ability to connect, it had once been one of Lucien's greatest assets, and now it was working against him. "Let's go say hello," Lucien said suddenly to Seraphine, his voice tight. Seraphine's eyes narrowed. "Are you sure that's wise?" "I'm not letting her dominate my event." He guided Seraphine across the room, their approach slow but deliberate. Heads turned as they passed, some guests subtly stepping aside to watch the impending collision. It was the kind of moment that didn't need an announcer. Everyone could feel the shift in the air. Isolde noticed them long before they reached her. She had just set her champagne flute on the edge of the fountain when Lucien's tall frame entered her periphery. Her posture remained relaxed, but she pivoted slightly, ensuring she faced them head-on. "Isolde," Lucien said, his tone a careful mix of politeness and control. "Didn't expect to see you here." She smiled lightly, the kind that could be mistaken for warmth if you didn't know better. "Why not? I was invited, same as you." Seraphine stood a half-step ahead of Lucien now, her hand tightening possessively on his arm. "We were just talking about the guest list," she said sweetly, her gaze flicking over Isolde's gown. "I suppose it's nice they're including all sorts this year." The words were wrapped in honey but sharp enough to cut. A few onlookers exchanged looks, knowing a social slap when they heard one. Isolde didn't take the bait. "Yes," she replied evenly, "it's wonderful that the Foundation values variety, keeps things interesting." Lucien cleared his throat as though trying to reset the tone. "You look different." "Better?" she asked, her eyebrow lifting just enough to make him hesitate. He didn't answer. Not verbally, anyway. The flicker in his eyes said more than words could. The chairman, sensing the undercurrent, stepped in diplomatically. "Lucien, you didn't tell me your ex-wife was such a strong supporter of the arts. She's been telling me about her recent projects. Very impressive work." Lucien blinked. "Recent projects?" Isolde's smile widened slightly. "Yes, I've been consulting for a few startups. Some of them even intersect with your industry." She let that hang in the air just long enough for the implication to sink in. Seraphine's nails dug into Lucien's sleeve. "Well," she said, voice bright but strained, "it's certainly admirable that you've kept busy." "I find it helps." Isolde replied smoothly, to focus on building rather than replacing. A sharp inhale from somewhere in the small crowd signaled the impact of the remark. Seraphine's smile faltered, and Lucien's jaw tightened. Before the moment could be salvaged, another guest, one of the gala's major donors, approached. "Isolde, I was hoping you'd be here. the woman said warmly. "Would you mind coming with me? There's someone I'd like you to meet." Isolde glanced at Lucien. "Excuse me," she said, her voice polite but final. She turned and walked away, the donor linking arms with her like they were old friends. The little cluster of onlookers slowly dispersed, their whispers following her departure. Lucien stood rooted for a moment, the humiliation slow burning in his chest. Seraphine leaned closer, her voice a hiss. "You let her walk away from you, in front of everyone." "This isn't over," Lucien said quietly, his eyes tracking Isolde across the room. But for tonight, at least in that moment, it was. The rest of the evening only deepened the shift. Every time Lucien tried to steer attention back to himself and Seraphine, something happened to derail it. A prominent investor would pull Isolde into a conversation. A photographer would request her photo for the event's society pages. Even the mayor's wife made a point of introducing her to the city's cultural board. It wasn't just about beauty, it was about presence. Isolde carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who had nothing to prove but every intention of succeeding. By the time the auction began, it was undeniable. The night no longer belonged to Lucien and Seraphine. It belonged to the woman he'd thought was finished. And as the final gavel fell on the last auction item, Lucien realized something chilling. This wasn't a lucky coincidence. It was a calculated re-entry. And he had no idea what her endgame was. The applause from the final auction items still echoed faintly as Isolde slipped out of the main ballroom. She had smiled, shaken hands, and navigated the social currents like a seasoned diplomat, but every polished exchange had taken a toll. Now, in the quiet of the marble corridor outside the gala, she finally let her breath out. Her heels clicked softly against the floor as she walked toward the powder room, the muffled music behind her fading into silence. Inside, the lighting was warm but unforgiving, casting sharp reflections in the mirrors. She stepped up to the sink, placed both hands on the cool marble countertop, and stared at her own reflection. From the outside, she was flawless, the gown perfect, the makeup untouched, the expression calm. But beneath the surface, her heart was pounding. Not because she'd seen Lucien again, not exactly. It was because standing in front of him, seeing that flicker of recognition and discomfort in his eyes, had dredged up 1,000 memories she'd worked so hard to bury. The first time they'd walked into a gala together. The way his hand had rested at the small of her back, protective and proud. The nights they'd planned the future over candlelight. And then, the betrayals, the coldness, the public humiliation. Her grip on the marble tightened. "You came here for a reason," she reminded herself. "Don't let the ghosts drag you under." The powder room door creaked open. In the mirror, Isolde saw a flash of emerald silk. Seraphine. She moved with deliberate slowness, her heels clicking like a metronome on the tile. She stopped a few feet away, leaning casually against the wall, her reflection meeting Isolde's in the mirror. "Enjoying yourself?" Seraphine asked, her tone light but edged. Isolde didn't flinch. "I am, actually. It's been a productive evening." Seraphine's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Productive how? Catching up with old acquaintances? Flirting with men who used to be your circle?" Isolde turned then, facing her fully. "You seem awfully concerned for someone who supposedly replaced me." The remark hit its mark. Seraphine's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice even. "I just think it's interesting that you'd show up here, after everything, almost like you're trying to make a point." "Maybe I am," Isolde said quietly. "Or maybe I just wanted to see how small this world feels when you step out of it for a while." They locked eyes, the air between them charged. Then Seraphine pushed off the wall and stepped closer, her perfume sharp in the air. "Let me give you some advice," she said softly, so only Isolde could hear. "If you think you can walk back into this circle and take the spotlight, you're going to be disappointed. This isn't your stage anymore, it's mine." Isolde's lips curved into the faintest smile. "Spotlights move, Seraphine. All it takes is one stronger light." Seraphine's eyes narrowed. Without another word, she turned and walked out, the door swinging shut behind her. Isolde stood still for a moment, letting the silence return. She didn't feel shaken exactly, but the encounter had left her with a familiar ache, the same one she'd felt when she first learned of Lucien's betrayal. A reminder that no matter how composed she appeared, the scars were still there. She left the powder room, But instead of returning to the main ballroom, she took the side hallway that led to the terrace. The cool night air wrapped around her as she stepped outside. The city spread out below in a sea of glittering lights. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel the weight of it all. The years lost, the love squandered, the humiliation endured. Her chest tightened, and she pressed a hand there, grounding herself. Behind her, the terrace door opened again. Lucian. He stepped out, closing the door quietly behind him. "You've always hated these things," he said, his voice softer than it had been all night. She didn't turn. "And yet, here we are." He moved to stand beside her, leaving a careful distance between them. "You've changed," he said after a pause. "People do," she replied, "especially when they've been given a reason." Lucian exhaled, his gaze fixed on the skyline. "I didn't expect this. You, like this." "That's because you never saw me," she said, finally turning to meet his eyes. "You saw what I could do for you, not who I was." The words hung between them, heavier than the city air. Before he could respond, the terrace door opened again. Seraphine's voice cut through the tension. "Lucian, the auction results are being announced." Her eyes flicked between them, assessing. Lucian hesitated. For a brief moment, it looked like he might stay. But then he nodded, stepping away from the railing. "Enjoy your night, Isolde." She watched them leave together, the emerald gown disappearing into the glow of the ballroom. Alone again, Isolde let out a slow breath. The tremor in her hands annoyed her. She had promised herself she wouldn't let him get under her skin, and yet here she was, fighting to steady her pulse. For the first time all evening, doubt crept in. Was she really as in control as she wanted to believe? Or had she walked straight into a game he still knew how to play better than anyone? Inside the ballroom, Lucian and Seraphine moved like a united front, but behind their practiced smiles, a different conversation unfolded. "She's here for a reason," Seraphine whispered as they made their way toward the stage. "I know," Lucian said. "And you're going to find out what it is," she pressed. "I will," he promised, though he wasn't entirely sure how. Seraphine's eyes glinted. "Good, because if you don't, I will." The Blackwood Gala was winding into its later hours, but the energy in the ballroom hadn't faded. The auction winners were being congratulated. Waiters carried out silver trays of espresso and petit fours, and the string quartet transitioned into a livelier set. Isolde had returned from the terrace, her composure restored, her mind sharper than it had been all evening. The confrontation with Seraphine and the quiet, loaded exchange with Lucian had done more than stir old wounds. It had crystallized her resolve. She hadn't come to the gala just to be seen. She had come to start something. Near the far side of the ballroom, a man waved to her. Crisp navy suit, salt and pepper hair, the easy confidence of someone used to making billion-dollar decisions. Nathan Cross, CEO of Crosstech Industries. They had met 6 months earlier at a private networking dinner, long after Isolde's divorce. Nathan had been impressed by her business acumen, not realizing until later that she was the Isolde Raoul. Tonight, he was more than just a friendly acquaintance. He was a critical piece of her plan. "Isolde," he greeted warmly, taking her hand. "I didn't know you were back in the city." "Just recently," she replied. "And you?" "Busy as ever. But I've been meaning to follow up on our last conversation. The joint venture idea, have you given it more thought?" Her lips curved. "I have. In fact, I think now might be the perfect time." Nathan's eyes lit with interest. "I'll set up a meeting. We can go over the numbers, maybe next week?" "Why wait?" she said, tilting her head toward the charity's private lounge just off the ballroom. "We could talk now. A few minutes, nothing formal." He hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Lead the way." As they walked toward the lounge, Isolde felt the eyes on her. The same ripple effect she had caused earlier was happening again, only this time she wanted it. She knew exactly who was watching. Lucian. He was across the room with Seraphine, speaking to the Foundation's treasurer, but his gaze tracked Isolde and Nathan like a laser. Seraphine noticed too. Her smile stiffened. Inside the lounge, the atmosphere shifted. Gone was the hum of the ballroom. Here it was quieter, more intimate. They took seats near the window, the city lights stretching out beyond the glass. Nathan leaned forward. "I've reviewed the projections you sent me. Your concept is strong, very strong. If we partnered, Crosstech could provide the infrastructure, you'd handle the brand development." That's exactly what I had in mind, Isolde said. And if we moved quickly, we could secure the prime locations before anyone else even notices the opportunity. He nodded, already calculating. It's bold. I like it. She smiled, but her mind wasn't just on business. She knew word would travel fast once the right people saw her in here with Nathan. And in their world, perception often preceded reality. If people believed she was launching something big, they would treat her as though she already had. 15 minutes later, they stepped back into the ballroom, still deep in conversation. Nathan excused himself to greet another guest, leaving Isolde to make her way toward the bar. She didn't get far before Lucian intercepted her. Interesting choice of company, he said smoothly, falling into step beside her. Why? She asked without breaking stride. Worried he might be more interesting than you? Lucian's mouth curved in a humorless smile. Nathan Cross isn't in your league. He's a shark. He'll use you for whatever he can get. Isolde stopped, turning to face him fully. Funny. That's exactly what I used to think about you. His smile faltered just slightly. This isn't a game, Isolde. It never was, she said. You just thought you were the only one allowed to win. Before he could reply, Nathan returned, handing her a fresh glass of champagne. Lucian, he said politely, good to see you. Lucian's response was equally polite, but his eyes were cold. Nathan. As Nathan moved on, Isolde looked back at Lucian. Enjoy the rest of your night. She left him standing there, the glass in his hand untouched. Across the room, Seraphine watched the entire exchange. She crossed to Lucian, her tone sharp. She's plotting something. Lucian didn't deny it. I know. Then stop her? Seraphine pressed. His gaze followed Isolde as she rejoined a small circle of guests, her laughter easy, her confidence unshaken. Not yet, he said finally. I want to see what she's building first. For the rest of the evening, the social tide continued to shift. Isolde was no longer just the unexpected ex-wife in the room. She was a player. Conversations hushed when she passed, not out of curiosity now, but out of calculation. By the time the gala wound down, she had spoken with 3 potential investors, secured 2 follow-up meetings, and left Lucian with more questions than answers. In the car on the way home, she allowed herself a small, private smile. Tonight had been the first move. And the best part? She knew Lucian well enough to be certain he wouldn't be able to stop himself from walking straight into the trap she was setting. The morning after the Blackwood Gala, sunlight streamed into Isolde's penthouse, cutting through the floor-to-ceiling windows and spilling across the minimalist furniture. She stood in her kitchen, coffee in hand, replaying every moment from the night before. Lucian's flicker of discomfort, Seraphine's barely concealed hostility, Nathan Cross's genuine interest in her proposal. The pieces were falling into place, but she knew the game had only just begun. She set her mug down and walked into her study. On the desk sat a thick, leather-bound notebook, its pages filled with neat, deliberate handwriting. This wasn't a journal, it was a blueprint. Every page contained details of contacts, opportunities, and connections she had quietly nurtured over the last year. It was her war map. The gala had confirmed what she already suspected. Lucian's empire was stable on the surface, but vulnerable underneath. He had expanded too quickly, relied too heavily on public perception, and underestimated the value of relationships he'd let slip away. Relationships like the ones she still maintained. If she was going to take her place back in this world, not as someone's wife, but as a force in her own right, she needed to be undeniable. The first step was image. For years, her style had been dictated by Lucian's preferences. He liked understated elegance, muted tones, and predictable silhouettes. She had worn them without question, blending into the background of his spotlight. Now, she wanted the opposite. She called Camille, an old friend and one of the city's most sought-after stylists. By the afternoon, her living room was transformed into a private showroom. Racks of bold, tailored pieces lined the walls, sharp-shouldered blazers in jewel tones, silk blouses with dramatic drapes, evening gowns that demanded attention. "This one," Camille said, holding up a scarlet sheath dress. "No one will forget you in this." Isolde tried it on, turning in front of the mirror. The color blazed against her skin, the cut hugging every curve without crossing into vulgarity. "I like it," she said simply. From there, they rebuilt her entire wardrobe. Every piece was a statement, every accessory a weapon. When she was done, The woman in the mirror wasn't just Isolde Rahl. She was someone new. Someone who could walk into any room and command it. But transformation wasn't just about clothes. She knew the real change had to come from the inside. She doubled her training sessions with her personal trainer, not for vanity, but for strength. She took voice coaching to refine her tone, learning how to make every word land with precision. She revisited her notes from years of shadowing Lucian in business meetings, sharpening her negotiation skills. And she kept building her network. In the weeks following the gala, she met with Nathan Cross twice, each time bringing more concrete details for their potential venture. She reconnected with old acquaintances who had drifted after her divorce, not with apologies but with value, introducing them to opportunities, making herself useful again. People remembered generosity. They also remembered loyalty. By the end of the month, she was no longer the topic of whispered curiosity. She was the subject of open conversation. Society columnists noted her stunning resurgence and magnetic presence. Business insiders began speculating about her next move. Lucian noticed too. 3 weeks after the gala, she received an unexpected invitation, dinner at the Metropolitan Club, hosted by the Rahl Foundation. It was the kind of event Lucian used to guard carefully, inviting only the most strategically valuable guests. The inclusion of her name was deliberate. Camille smirked when Isolde showed her the invitation. "He's rattled," she said. "He wants to remind you, and everyone else, whose table you used to sit at." "Then I suppose I'll have to remind him," Isolde replied, "that I'm perfectly capable of hosting my own table." She chose a black velvet gown for the night, its high neckline and long sleeves offset by a dramatic open back. A single sapphire pendant rested at the base of her throat, drawing the eye without screaming for attention. When she walked into the Metropolitan Club, the effect was immediate. Conversations paused, heads turned, and more than one guest rose from their seat to greet her. Lucian was already at the head table, Seraphine beside him. His eyes found her instantly, and for the briefest second, something unreadable crossed his face. Throughout the evening, Isolde moved with precision. She spoke with key donors, complimented their recent projects, and dropped subtle hints about her upcoming collaboration with Nathan Cross, just enough to pique interest without revealing details. She knew the whispers would reach Lucian before the night was over, and they did. By dessert, he was at her side, his smile pleasant but his voice low. "You're making waves." "That's the idea," she said. He studied her for a moment. "This venture with Cross, what's your angle?" She met his gaze without flinching. "You'll see." The next morning, the society pages carried photos of her at the dinner, alongside captions speculating about her mysterious business comeback. Her phone buzzed with messages from people she hadn't heard from in years, each one eager to catch up. She allowed herself a moment to savor it. This was no longer about survival. It was about dominance. And she was just getting started, because the next move would be public and impossible for Lucian or Seraphine to ignore. The invitation was embossed in silver, the kind that spoke of money without saying it out loud, the Midtown Innovators Summit and Charity Gala. It was one of the city's biggest events for the business elite, part networking, part performance, part bragging rights. Lucian Rahl was on the headline panel that year, scheduled to deliver the keynote address about the future of corporate synergy. Seraphine was set to accompany him, her gown and her presence carefully chosen to reinforce the image of a united power couple. But this year, there was an unspoken undercurrent of anticipation. Ever since the Blackwood Gala, Isolde's name had been on everyone's lips. Rumors about her new business venture swirled in hushed tones, rumors that, by design, she had neither confirmed nor denied. Now, for the first time since her marriage ended, she would be attending the same high-profile event as Lucian, not as his guest, but as an independent invitee. When she arrived, the press swarmed, not around Lucian, but around her. She wore the scarlet sheath dress Camille had saved for a night like this, paired with diamond drop earrings that caught every camera flash. "Isolde, is it true you're launching a new company?" one reporter called out. She smiled smoothly. "You'll hear all about it soon." Inside, the ballroom was a sea of designer gowns and tuxedos. The scent of orchids hung in the air, the music soft enough not to interfere with business talk. Isolde made her way through the crowd with practiced ease, exchanging pleasantries, planting small conversational seeds she knew would sprout into speculation by the end of the night. The keynote was scheduled just after the first course. Guests took their seats at the long banquet tables as the event host stepped up to the microphone. "Please welcome to the stage, Lucien Rall." Polite applause filled the room as Lucien took the podium, his smile confident, his suit flawless. He launched into his speech, weaving corporate jargon with just enough humor to keep the audience engaged. He was in his element until he reached the section about emerging market collaborations. "And that's why," he said, "I believe the future lies in strategic partnerships with visionaries who—" The ballroom doors opened. Isolde walked in, not late enough to be rude, but late enough to make every head turn. She didn't hurry to her table. She moved at an unhurried pace, acknowledging a few guests as she passed, each interaction stealing another sliver of attention from Lucien. He cleared his throat, pressing on with his speech, but the energy had shifted. When she finally took her seat, at a table near the front, beside Nathan Cross, the whispers began in earnest. By the time Lucien wrapped up, the room's focus had already drifted. The applause felt polite rather than electric. The host returned to the microphone. "And now a very special announcement from one of our distinguished guests, Isolde Rall." Lucien's head snapped toward the host. Seraphine's hand clenched around her champagne flute. Isolde rose gracefully, walking to the podium. She didn't need notes. "Good evening," she began, her voice calm but carrying easily. "I'm honored to be here among so many leaders, innovators, and changemakers. Tonight, I'm proud to share that I am launching Aurora Strategies, a consultancy dedicated to building partnerships between technology startups and global markets. Our first major collaboration will be with Crosstech Industries, led by my esteemed friend, Nathan Cross." A murmur swept the room. Nathan stood briefly, offering a nod that confirmed her words. "This venture," Isolde continued, "is about more than business. It's about resilience, reinvention, and the belief that the end of one chapter can be the beginning of something far greater." Her gaze drifted, just for a moment, toward Lucien. "I know what it means to rebuild," she said, her tone warm but edged. "And I know that when you stand in your own power, no one, not even those who once underestimated you, can take it away." The applause was thunderous. Cameras flashed. Several guests stood to shake her hand before she even left the stage. At their table, Lucien's jaw was tight. Seraphine leaned in, her voice low but venomous. "She just hijacked your event." He didn't answer, because she was right. For the rest of the evening, the spotlight never left Isolde. Investors approached her with interest. Journalists begged for interviews. Even a few of Lucien's own allies drifted to her side of the room. At one point, as she was speaking with a group of venture capitalists, Lucien approached. "Congratulations," he said, his smile tight. "Thank you," she replied smoothly. "It's just the beginning." "I hope you know what you're getting into," he said quietly. She met his eyes. "I know exactly what I'm getting into. Do you?" Before he could answer, Nathan joined them, sliding an arm around Isolde's waist in a gesture that was both protective and proprietary. "We have that media interview, remember?" "Of course," Isolde said, letting Nathan guide her away. Lucien stood there, the room buzzing around him, the realization sinking in that this was no longer his narrative to control. And Seraphine, watching from a distance, felt the first real pang of fear. Because she could see it now, clear as day. This wasn't just a comeback. This was a takeover. 2 months after the Midtown Innovators Summit, the city's social and business landscape looked very different. Aurora Strategies had launched with a splash. Articles in Forbes and the Wall Street Journal praised the company's bold vision and rapid execution. The partnership with Crosstech was already showing results. 3 startups had signed multi-million-dollar contracts through Isolde's network. Her calendar was packed with meetings, interviews, and speaking engagements. For the first time in years, she wasn't moving in Lucien's shadow. She was creating her own. And Lucien felt it. His empire, while still formidable, had started showing cracks. 2 of his longtime investors quietly pulled funding for an expansion project, citing shifting market priorities. But Isolde knew the truth. They'd shifted toward her. Even Seraphine had begun to show signs of strain. The gossip pages hinted at tensions between them. She was photographed leaving a charity luncheon alone, her expression tight, her once flawless PR sheen slipping. The final blow came in the form of an invitation. The Global Business Excellence Awards, an international gala honoring achievements in leadership and innovation, was to be held at the Grand Regent Hotel. Isolde had been nominated for Visionary Entrepreneur of the Year, a category Lucien had once assumed was his to dominate. The night of the awards, the ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers and the world's elite. Cameras lined the entrance. Lucien arrived first with Seraphine, dressed to perfection, but walking with the stiffness of someone preparing for a fight. When Isolde's car pulled up, the flashbulbs erupted. She stepped out in a midnight blue gown with a sweeping cape that caught the light like liquid sapphire. Nathan Cross accompanied her, but the way she carried herself made it clear she was the star tonight. Inside, the seating chart placed them just 2 tables apart. The tension was thick enough to taste. Dinner passed with polite conversation and subtle glances across the room. Then, the awards began. When the Visionary Entrepreneur category was announced, the host's voice rang out, and the award goes to Isolde Raal, founder of Aurora Strategies. The applause was deafening. Isolde rose gracefully, her cape trailing behind her as she walked to the stage. She accepted the Crystal Award with a smile, then stepped up to the microphone. "Thank you," she began, her voice steady. "This award means more to me than I can say, not just because of the recognition, but because of the journey it represents. A year ago, I was standing on the sidelines of my own life. Tonight, I stand here because I chose to take it back." She paused, scanning the room, her gaze lingering for a moment on Lucien and Seraphine. "I want to say something to anyone who's ever been told they're replaceable, or that their worth is tied to someone else's approval. You are not defined by who walks away from you. You are defined by who you choose to become after they do." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. She continued, "Sometimes the end of a story isn't a tragedy, it's the prologue to a much greater one. So to anyone standing where I once stood, wondering if you can rise again, know this: you can. And when you do, you will be stronger than they ever imagined." She ended with a simple, confident nod. The standing ovation that followed wasn't just for her business success, it was for the strength she embodied. As she returned to her seat, Lucien's expression was unreadable. Seraphine's was not. Her tightly pressed lips told the whole story. Later that evening, as the crowd mingled, Lucien approached her. "Congratulations," he said quietly. "Thank you," she replied, her tone polite but distant. "I underestimated you," he admitted. "Yes," she said, meeting his gaze evenly. "You did, and that was your mistake, not mine." For a moment, something like regret flickered in his eyes. But Isolde had no interest in deciphering it. She had her future to focus on, and it didn't include him. Nathan joined her then, offering her a glass of champagne. "To new beginnings," he said. She clinked her glass against his. "And to never letting anyone else write our endings." As the night wore on, the ballroom's attention remained on her. People wanted to speak with her, to be associated with her, to hear her story. She had become exactly what she'd promised herself she would be, undeniable. And somewhere in the corner, Lucien and Seraphine stood together, looking out over a room that was no longer theirs to command. By the time she left the Grand Regent, award in hand, the cool night air felt different, brighter, freer. The city stretched out before her, full of possibilities she'd once thought were lost. She didn't look back, because the truth was, she wasn't returning to anything. She was moving forward, and the world was finally moving with her. So the story has ended, my wonderful friends. Are you still here with me until now? If you are, then I know something in this journey has touched your heart in a way only you can understand. Maybe you saw yourself in Isolde's quiet pain, in the way she had to pick herself up when life felt like it had been shattered. Or maybe you felt the power of her transformation, the moment she realized she didn't have to stay where she was broken, that she could walk forward and build something greater. Life has a way of testing us, sometimes in cruel and unexpected ways. People we trust may turn away. Doors we thought were open forever may slam shut. But as the old heterodox saying goes, the wound is where the light enters you. What breaks you can also be the very thing that shows you your strength. Isolde's story reminds us that revenge isn't always about hurting someone back. It's about reclaiming the parts of yourself you gave away. It's about walking into a room without fear, not because you've forgotten the pain, but because you've outgrown it. And maybe, just maybe, your greatest victory will be when you no longer need their approval, their apology, or their permission to live fully. So if you're standing at the edge of your own ending, remember, this might not be the end at all. This could be the start of your greatest chapter. Stand tall, speak your truth, wear the colors that make you feel alive. Build something so strong that even the people who doubted you have no choice but to see. If this story stirred something inside you, if it reminded you of your own resilience, then please, like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you don't miss the next story that might just be the spark you need. And tell me in the comments, what was your turning point moment? I read every single one, and your words matter here.